This is coming up to 15 hours GMT in London on Thursday, the 6th of August, 2020. Now, this is the Guardian we discussed in the previous edition in the morning about the deregulation regime that is being foisted by Robert Jenrick as part of Boris Johnson's agenda to do away with local democracy and local accountability. And they are describing the local planning as mere red tape, a nuisance. So we'll be talking about the role of the local councils, because the local councils, contrary to the image presented in the media and in parliament, is actually on the ground responsible for the implementation of a whole number of very important legal issues and legal provisions, or responsible for blocking those, as was exposed in the case of the Kensington and Chelsea Council in West London, that was responsible for the massacre in June 2017 of the 71 people on the Grenfell Tower. The role of the local council is a matter absolutely central to the lives of people in the areas concerned. And it's not just about building control, it's not just about planning. It's about day-to-day delivery in the case of East London boroughs, and in the case of boroughs that have got significant numbers of people in low income, or in many cases no income. In the case of welfare and social security, so-called. Now, we shall be discussing the social security regime that has been in place since the Conservatives and the Lib Dems formed the government in May 2010. From that time, the attack on the rights of people to have basic income as social security was mounted in a merciless way and with no opposition in Parliament from the Labour Party. The Labour Party mouthed slogans, but it did not oppose any of the measures. As I said to Robin Wales, the mayor at the time, elected mayor at the time, in place in the name of Newham, at the expense of the community in Newham, during a broadcast lasting about half an hour or so on the 14th of March 2018. I told Robin Wales to explain to viewers and to me why he failed to take action against what he was saying was the Conservative legislation and laws banning or barring local councils from building or extending council housing stock. And Robin Wales said, in a convoluted way, he said that he didn't do that because he was advised, legally advised, not to do that. I said, show me the legal advice. This is a very brief summary of what went on in that conversation, on air, online, and live on the 14th of March 2018. And he said he would send to the program that I was appearing against him on, he would send the copy of the legal advice. And I said to the viewers, I looked at the camera and I said, remember what he's saying. Now that was more than 2 years ago, and Robin Wales has of course been replaced, but the fact is that his promise has not been delivered. That his excuse was that he was legally advised not to take action against the conservative government or against the conservative government's legislation against councils having the freedom and the option and the opportunity to build council homes and provide council housing to people. Now, I have been in contact with Newham Council since that time, and Newham Council has not provided a copy, and I have done this a dozen times or more while Wales was still in place until the election of the 3rd of May 2018, when he was obviously no longer the mayor after the election result was announced. Now, the chief executive's office or the chief executive's directorate in the Newham Council has refused to give me any explanation as to what the legal advice was. After literally dozens of reminders and explanations and clarifications and demands, Newham Council has given me the most unacceptable, unreasonable, and dishonest excuse, saying that no longer Robin Wales is no longer the mayor. So whatever he promised did not apply. Now that's not true. Constitutionally and legally, whatever undertaking Wales made in his capacity as the incumbent mayor becomes the duty and responsibility of the executive of the council. It was not a personal statement that Wales was making. And I'm saying this because the behavior of Robin Wales contains so many elements of wrongdoing by the incumbent in the post of elected mayor that in order to get the council to serve the community in the borough concerned, we need to examine Robin Wales's behavior. And he never appeared, to my knowledge and to the knowledge of some other people who are familiar with his record, Robin Wales never appeared on a live program of the type or the kind or the description that he did on the 14th of March 2018. And he did that because he needed to rebut whatever had been said 2 days earlier on the 12th of March 2018 by Roxana Fias on the same channel. But Robin Wales, not the presenter of the program, had any idea that I would be there on the 14th of March. Because for whatever reason, they never reckoned with the fact that I would be probably available or interested in appearing against him. I think the people concerned must have thought that they would manage to give him the platform and ask him the questions and whatever. I don't know, because there has never been any discussion. But when I was approached, literally minutes before the program was due to go on air, I was approached by telephone and text and without any warning whatsoever. I'll come to the details of the preparations for online or on-air satellite or terrestrial television programs, documentary programs, factual programs. And I can say before the details that the program, the channel I was on, is one of those outlets that is operated in the name of one of the ethnic minorities, so-called, in London, in the UK, which is the Bangladeshis. These channels and outlets are operated without any consideration for factual authenticity and the factual accuracy and the preparation, and they assume that it will be a gossip, and it will be a gossip that will be enabled by some miraculous force which cannot be sourced, identified, but it will appear as the program went on air. Now, to deal with the record of somebody like Robin Wales, it is objectively acceptable and assertable that you need at least a few weeks' notice to prepare for the research and factual fact checking. That was not done because I was called called to attend a place near Poplar, and I had to travel from central London, and it literally gave me maybe 25 minutes to travel or 30 minutes to travel. And I was there in the studio facing him, and he probably didn't know who I was. At least that is the assumption I'm making. He might have known, but he didn't know. And so therefore he greeted me with a positive shake of hands. But when the program got going and he found that I was asking him questions that he was not prepared for, it became quite clear that Robin Wales put on this red kind of hue, which apparently he puts on when he is unhappy with something, when he is tense and under pressure. Essentially, I asked him that constitutional law allowed him to challenge any decision, any legislation, any executive order, any statutory instrument issued by any executive agency, including the central government. The point is that you can challenge any decision. Whether the challenge is successful in your favor or not is another matter, but the fact that you can challenge creates the momentum of awareness and discussion and conversation around the issue. And that is the actual purpose. It's not the result. It's the fact that you are raising a challenge against what you know is an anti-social, anti-community, anti-social security, anti-welfare, anti-housing rights measure. And no local council, including Newham, including Tower Hamlets, including Hackney, no local council controlled by the Labour Party elected councillors anywhere in England has challenged the Conservative legislation that attacks basic rights, including, of course, the right to have less red tape. That is what the government want to have the right to have the less red tape and to reduce the say on planning by the local interests, the community interests, the social interests, and the people dependent on the provision of housing, provision of welfare by the local government. So this edition, we are starting to look at Newham Council, and this should be treated as part one of the exclusive report. We have been flagging it for several weeks, but the essential report is beginning today about Newham Council. And I'm saying that I have done the research, I have conducted the research, I have coordinated the research, and it has been two fronts on which I have done the research. One is empirical, that is my particular claims against Newham Council, and the other is objective, and that can be extended or interchanged. The two of the findings, or the findings of the two fronts of research and investigation can be interchanged. And I'm saying this because I gave the Newham Council notice today in a telephone call in the last few hours that this will be the last opportunity I would give to Newham Council to make any comment about what I'm going to broadcast and publish about their behavior. I have mentioned Newham's regime fronted by Robin Wales' successor as the incumbent now as elected mayor, Roxana Fias. I've mentioned her unreliability, her particular acts of dishonesty, her complicity with the regime inside the Newham Council, where the accountability is absent and where the employees are given the license to tell lies and to make routine perpetrations of lying. And there is no accountability, there is no answerability. And Newham Council has no councillor in place of whatever background, and I'll come to that mysterious word background because that is absolutely an absolutely ironic word in the case of Newham. Whatever the councillors' backgrounds, there is no councillor in place in Newham Council now who can be relied on to raise the democratic issues of accountability, of answerability, of legality, of constitutionality, of due process, or let alone ethics and morality. And this means that long before the coronavirus infected or affected Newham, because Newham featured as the worst local borough in England, where the frequency and the incidence of the spread of the virus was the highest per capita. That is, per the number of people, per the 1,000, 100,000. And that actually is symptomatic, representative of the lack of proper administration, proper government, proper governance, and proper accountability by Roxana Fias. Roxana Fias also hired a chief executive, a serial chief executive, let's say, of local councils who was very much compromised morally by her association with the corrupt, privateering outfits, contractors, government contractors, Krapita. And that was why she was posted the last time she was there after leaving a number of councils with big payouts. And that appointment by Roxana Fias showed that she was reliant on the compromised elements, not on creating a fresh atmosphere away from the compromised, unrepresentative, unaccountable, undemocratic structure and environment that Robin Wales had created over the 16 years that he had been imposed as the elected mayor. Before that, he was the elected leader of the council shortly after Stephen Timms went on to become the MP for East Ham. So Robin Wales followed Stephen Timms as the leader of Newham Council, and Robin Wales was in post for 16 years as elected mayor, and there was nobody challenging him. This word is not personal. Challenging his regime, challenging his culture, challenging his style, his ideology. Although I didn't tell him while on air against him on the 14th of March 2018, I had already been aware of his sadistic personal orientation, as he was one of the rarest persons in Britain that belonged to a club that was named to celebrate the murder of Leon Trotsky. We did discuss Trotsky because Robin Wales is absolutely obsessed against Trotsky. And anyone who challenges him, he thinks is a Trotskyite. So he said that, but before he said that, I actually anticipated him saying that during the program. and I referred to Trotsky. And he, obviously, it triggered with him that I was a Trotskyite. Now, I told the viewers that I was not only not a Trotskyite, but I was actually hostile to most of the Trotskyites' techniques in Britain politically. But that did not preclude my asserting objectively independent, democratic, ethical accountability rights and claims. But Robin Wales was not able to comprehend this, what he must have thought a dichotomy, because he thought that in order to be democratic, you have to be subservient to Robin Wales. And anyone who is not subservient to Robin Wales is a Trotskyite. So that kind of narrowness prevails in Robin Wales's head, and it prevailed in his head for the entire time that he had been in Newham, since arriving there in 1976 or 78, whatever the actual year. It was in the 70s, the late 70s, that he arrived in Newham and took over. And what Robin Wales managed to do in Newham was a disaster for the idea of the Labour Party as even a democratic party. In Newham, as I said, the background, the word background is ironic. In Newham, Newham is the only place, as far as I know, in all of England, that has got a one-party council, one-party mayor. There is no opposition. Not even a token Green or a token Lib Dem or a token anything else, even not a token Conservative. Now, this is something that is absolutely extraordinarily alarming, because if there were democratic people active in Newham, either in the Labour Party or on the council, then Robin Wales would have been gone long time ago as the mayor or the leader of the council, because Newham remains one of the worst run councils anywhere in Britain. And this is even according to the admirers of Roxana Fiaz, who is admired because she is treated as a possible tool for anti-Muslim propaganda. And that is why she was recruited as one of the 17 or 18 women, Muslim women, while the racist Gordon Brown was in post as the prime minister, unelected prime minister. And he was misled into that contraption by the racist woman that was the housing minister. What is the housing minister now? It was a tiny racist anti-Muslim woman who had challenged the people of Tower Hamlets on behalf of Una King. So what we are looking at in the case of Newham is all the problems of lack of democracy, lack of accountability, lack of answerability, lack of delivery, lack of social compassion and compassionate administration of its duties. All of these are present in the case of Newham Council. And I knew about Newham long before Robin Wales arrived in Newham, because as the elected editor of the student newspaper in 1976, I was covering Newham, Waltham Forest, and other East London areas. And Newham was as bad in 1976 as it has been all this time. And the history of Newham being undemocratic, corrupt, and culturally, politically backward is absolutely riveting. So we shall be covering all of that in the due kind of bulletins. But back to Robin Wales and in that television confrontation, evidential, factual confrontation. Because although I had not been given any notice to prepare, I had been prepared by my ordinary day-to-day activities and engagement as a campaigner, and I knew enough about Robin Wales to run a program for several hours if necessary. But Robin Wales said that my criticism of Newham Council as one of the worst councils in England, or the worst, was the same as my criticizing the people of Newham. Now, Wales was lying. I knew Newham and I belonged to the community, as I said, long before Robin Wales even physically arrived from Glasgow, Scotland, to Newham. I had arrived here years before he did. So the East End of London was where I had been active long before Robin Wales came from Scotland to Newham. Now, he said that my criticism of his regime, autocratic regime, was actually my criticism of the people of Newham. I put it on the record that it was absolutely ignorant and deliberate and prejudiced and racist lie. Because anyone who knows Robin Wilson's record and anyone who knows my record will know that I'm very particular about my accusations. I do not make unsubstantiated accusations about anybody. I will never do that. And I have never done that. And that is why he was repeatedly saying a stock phrase that I was criticizing, I was condemning the people of Newham. I was saying that the people of Newham were betrayed by him. And he was saying that I was attacking the people of Newham. A few days after that program was aired, I was told by somebody that I could at the time take the word for, but I have to verify that. It hasn't been verified yet by name and chapter and verse of everyone mentioned, but I was told that that program was watched by people in Newham at the time. And the people in Newham who watched it included a large number of people belonging to the Labour Party who mentioned my role in that program by name, and to the person that they said that they had watched it and they had liked what I had said, they passed their positive comments to me through that person. I'm not going to give the details any more than what I have just said, because I have to verify all of that all over, because I have not verified, but I've taken the word for it as was spoken to me. But it came from other people who have spoken to me since then. They have volunteered that they saw the program and they agreed with me, and they actually said that they agreed with me fully on my interrogation of Robin Wales. Now, why is it important? Because this person who said that was a sitting or serving councillor in Newham at the time, and he still is. Or he has been a councillor now, and probably at the time on the 14th of March, he probably was a candidate. I don't know that because I haven't checked that one. But this person is a councillor now in Newham. And he said that what I said about Robin Wales was absolutely spot on, and it was something that they all, whoever the others were with him, supported and agreed with. Now, if that is the case, then it shows that there was and there has been a number of options available to the party, Labour Party in Newham, to challenge Robin Wales, if not as extensively in terms of the principle and in terms of the evidence or in terms of the depth of constitutional law interrogation that I was doing, but they could raise issues against his dictatorship. On the program, I said on the 14th of March 2018 that he was gagging councillors and nobody dared to make any public statement against him. That is absolutely true. Even now, the Newham councillors, even former councillors, have not made any significant statement about Robin Wales and his failures and his autocratic rule or misrule at the expense of the people of Newham. Now, why am I going on about the Robin Wales? Because the elected mayor is a departure from democracy, although the limitation of the democracy in the leader-led council model is obvious, but compared to the elected mayor model, the leader-led model is far better and far more accessible and far more answerable and far more open to being held to account, no matter how limited that accountability is. Currently in Croydon, in South London, south of the River Thames, Croydon is now embroiled in a fight for and against having a referendum on having an elected mayor. And this is something that we shall be discussing in a special extended edition another time, because too many factors are involved there, and we need to examine and compare what went wrong in Tower Hamlets in 2010 when we supposedly opposed the referendum for an elected mayor, and this opposition was torpedoed by some of the members of the so-called campaign against the mayor system. We have named them and we have shamed them, and they will be forever not forgotten for their treachery and betrayal against democracy and the local community. And we are faced now in Tower Hamlets with a problem again. The so-called opponents of the mayor system are again infiltrating or have infiltrated or taken over the so-called opposition campaign so-called platform, and they're sabotaging it again. Because among these people is one or more than one person who thinks that there should be the next mayor. They think that if it is not John Biggs, the current incumbent, then there should be the mayor. Now, that is not what the community needs. The community in Tower Hamlets, as the community in Newham, these communities need to be rid of the executive elected mayor post and its corruption. We have in the past discussed many of the instances, exposed the actual incidents of corruption by Lutfur Rahman when he was in post for 5 calendar years, from October 2010 to 23rd of April 2015, when Richard Morey, the election commissioner, kicked him out of that post and barred him from election for 5 years. Now, it is clear that supporters of the mayor system, and supporters in particular of the same group or grouping that created Lutfur Rahman as a personality, are regrouping to get him again back in the race if the post remains. So we shall come to Tower Hamlets later. Now, back to Robin Wales and what he left for Roxana Fias. On the 14th of March, 2 days after Roxana Fias appeared in the same program, Robin Wales said that he wished Roxana Fias well because he thought that the promises she was making were very formidable. Now, he didn't specify the promises. In fact, he generally thought that Roxana Fias was making too many promises that she could not implement or carry. We shall come to those in later parts of this edition or in other editions. Now, Robin Wales became notorious during his time as mayor. The last 4 years were his worst 4 years because he was publicly engaged in various rows with campaigners, housing rights campaigners, and especially a group of women called the Focus 15 that were actually campaigning for the ending of the non-use and wasteful use or antisocial use of a particular council properties, and they were campaigning for housing rights. Now, Robin Wales also was reported by the Morning Star as having forced a single mother, homeless single mother, to be sent to a police station to spend the night. And these kind of notorious incidents made Robin Wales more notorious in news terms than he had been in the previous 12 years or so. So Robin Wales became quite clearly ready to be ousted from the post. But although he was discredited, the discredit was not being recognized or reported or discussed as being at the expense of the community, at the expense of the people generally, not about these campaigners, leaving aside those particular campaigners because they have been hijacked. They have been hijacked by a particular grouping and they are not independent members of the ordinary population. So that campaign fizzled out and became a sectarian agency. And we shall come to that. And I'm inviting them to challenge what I'm saying, challenge the veracity, accuracy of what I'm saying. I am saying that they have been taken over, infiltrated by a particular British typical left-wing outfit who are totally lost because they have no idea as to how to represent the local community, how to fight the corruption of the local council, how to advocate the community's rights in various aspects, housing, education, safety, everything. So I will deal with those if they have the evidence to challenge the factual accuracy of what I'm saying. And also that group has been infiltrated by agents of the Labour Party in Newham. The Labour Party in Newham is getting daily reports about all the campaigns that are known. So there is no part of the Labour Party in Newham that is actually independent of the council, and the flicker of a sign of independence that was seen in the months before the pandemic came on about having the mayor post actually scrapped, disappeared. And that shows that there was no real determination to get rid of the mayor post. Now, why is the mayor post so bad for the community? Here is the empirical evidence. Take these as the actual evidence that can be substantiated by emails, by letters, and by references to other communications. There was a claim for housing benefit. The claim for housing benefit was made on a form for housing benefit. But that form actually covers the alternative or the different type of benefit for the rental kind of sector. If a particular property is rented from a private landlord, then the renter, if they meet the income and other requirements for housing benefit, but they are not tenants of a council property, but of a private tenant, they get the local housing allowance. The local housing allowance is not the full amount of the rent owed, but it is almost, or it is nearly, or it is very much a helpful amount to the rent in the private sector. So there was an application for housing benefit, and the applicant was not told that they would be assessed on that form and assessed without verifying the actual facts of their circumstance. Now, the application was made in July 2016, and this is for the evidence. Anyone who wants to look at this can look at this and play this back, and they can check what I'm saying. So the application was made in the first week of July 2016, and the applicant did not receive a recognition. It was funny, it was significant because the application was sent by special delivery post, which was a guaranteed post, guaranteed delivery on the following day before 1 o'clock. So as the application was not acknowledged by the Newham Council, the applicant was being already chased by the so-called landlord or the so-called agent of the landlord for the rent or for the outcome. Now, this was too early, too soon, and too unfamiliar with the applicant because that situation had not existed in the previous housing addresses. There were local housing allowance received in the last address, but there was no third party involved as an agent or as a so-called landlord. So in order to stop the harassment, which began within days of the applicant moving into the property, the applicant made contact with Newham Council. And the Newham Council lied to begin with. They said they did not receive the application. Remember, it was sent by special delivery, recorded delivery, not recorded delivery, special delivery at, that is the most expensive postal charge that is available. So the applicant became concerned. Why would they be lying? So days later, the applicant was told on the telephone that they had received the application. And they wouldn't make a decision. They didn't say that they were not going to make a decision, but that is what they said. And while the agent or the so-called landlord's agent was harassing the applicant at the address where they had moved, asking questions. Now, there was physically nothing the applicant could do on top of what had been already done. Sent the application by special delivery and had made inquiries and had established that the council had received it at last. It took another week before the council sent a letter unsigned claiming that the applicant had not signed their name in the application, which was a lie. So when they sent that, the applicant contacted the people who sent this letter. And the person whose name is in the letter is not the one who answered. A string of other people answered dozens of phone calls that the applicant had made in the days since sending the application. And the person who had sent the unsigned letter alleging that the applicant had not signed the application never answered the phone, not on those occasions. So this went on for few weeks, until they say that the applicant had not completed the application fully. So this was denied by the applicant, who told them that that was a lie, and in any case, the applicant completed other forms and sent the same form over again. It happened several times. And again, the applicant queried what happened to the application, because there were repeated reminders from the landlord or the landlord's agent about what was happening, as if the applicant had something to hide. The applicant was the first one to get this sorted, and so that they could concentrate on their life. But they were not being left alone. They were not being left alone by the person who was reminding them of the rent and what was happening, reminding the question was being put to them, saying what is happening to the application. And the applicant was only able to tell the truth, that I'm waiting for the council to decide, or the council is saying this, or the council is denying this. Whatever the case was on the day was being told to the person demanding an answer as to what was happening to the application. Now, this is the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has tweeted today, or in the last 24 hours, that the COVID is being made complicated by the fact that people who are in lockdown are being stressed by mental illness. So the mental well-being is very important in fighting COVID. Words to that effect. Now, this was happening in 2016, 4 years before the virus came. And the applicant was being treated as if they were in an emergency and they had to be seeking relief round the clock. What could they say to the landlord's agent, or the so-called landlord's agent? Or what could they say to the council? Because the council was denying that they had completed the form properly, and the landlord's agent or whoever would not believe it or found it less than convincing. Now, why would an applicant hide the full extent of the truth? Because that was the truth, and that was more than the truth. That was more than anybody could be asked to provide to the council by way of application. So this went on. This council indecision, or lying about receiving the application, or lying about the contents of the application, went on for at least 5 weeks or more, until the applicant filed a claim in defamation against them in the High Court. Imagine that. Can you imagine a tenant, a private sector tenant, filing a High Court defamation action? How complicated can that be? And how demanding intellectually, evidentially, financially, and emotionally that kind of task can be? I'm giving all these details for Roxana Fiaz because on the 12th of March 2018, she appeared on the same program that I appeared 2 days later against Robin Williams. So she appeared with a member of her fan club at that time, or a member of the Labour Party in Newham. We shall come to the identity of that person in due course. But at that time, this person, who is a Bangladeshi, Roxana Fiaz, identifies herself as being of Pakistani background and her parents being Pakistani, although she said that she was born in the Myland Hospital in Tower Hamlets. And her biggest certifier is John Gray, a Welshman who has become the biggest certifier of Roxana Fiaz in Newham. We shall come to John Gray, Unison, and his checkered history of a career as a Unison bureaucrat later in due course. These people are discrediting these people, Roxana Fias, that member of the Labour Party so-called, who appeared with her on the 12th of March 2018, and John Gray and Robin Wales are among the people who are discrediting the name of local democracy, local council, and the Labour Party. Now, if they are doing this, does the Labour Party leadership know about this? If it doesn't, then that is where the damage is being done, and that is where Corbyn, taking a wider look at the many and the few, Corbyn completely became a garden gnome for the calendar years that he was in the post of leader of the Labour Party. Corbyn never, ever, Jeremy Corbyn never, ever, to my knowledge, uttered a single sentence. Jeremy Corbyn never, ever uttered a single sentence about accountability by the local councils to the communities. He did not. If he did, then he did that in a way that was actually cancelled by his support for the idea of the local council and local council staff. So therefore, anything he might have said would have been insincerely, dishonestly, opportunistically said by Corbyn. And that is where the so-called Red Wall loss on the 12th of December 2019 election. It is the entirety of the northern councils controlled by the Labour Party, which had significant numbers of mainly Pakistani voters and members in the community, that became an emblem of disgrace around the grooming of white girls by Asian Pakistani Muslim sex gangs and offenders. And no Labour Party member in Parliament, no Labour Party leader owned that responsibility of explaining why this happened. And I'm concentrating on the role played by local councils in discrediting, in denying, in depriving, in degenerating local councils, local communities, and in destroying the idea of the Labour Party as the people's party for the many, not the few. That is absolutely not borne out by the behavior of local councillors and the local councils and the local mayors vis-a-vis in relation to the local voters ordinarily. So there is corruption, there is criminality. And the criminality in the case of Tower Hamlets, of course, includes the conviction for fraud. The latest convicted Tower Hamlets Labour councillor, can you believe this? Anyone watching this in Asia or Africa, and doing so while still being under the impression that the standard of politics and democracy in Britain is far higher than Asia and Africa, must take a pause and listen to this. This is a commentary, this is a news report, this is an investigation report, and this is a seminar. I'm making it available freely on condition that this is acknowledged expressly by anyone who cites it or mentions it or learns from it or is informed by it. The latest, the newest Tower Hamlets Labour Party councillor to be convicted of fraud, serial housing fraud, is an admitted, actual practicing certificate holder, solicitor, a lawyer. I don't know what has happened to his certificate since he went to jail for 16 months. He may be due to be coming out or may have come out already. But the fact is that he was convicted of serial housing fraud. He is a lawyer. And that actually sums up the lowest possible quality of accountability in the Labour Party. And that is how the Labour Party became discredited as the party that is for the many. It is not for the many, it is for the crooks. And Corbyn never understood that. Corbyn keeps appearing and making these shallow slogans online now about all kinds of issues. But Corbyn never understood the depth of deceit and fraud and criminality perpetrated by elected Labour councillors. Those Pakistani origin sex attackers targeting mainly white girls in the northern areas, they did that because the rest of the Labour Party went to sleep. The police did not believe many of the victims, the white girls. How could that be? In a country where being Muslim is treated as in itself an offense by the police when the police are approached by Muslims who are victims of other crimes, how could it be that the police ignored these white girls when they were being targeted by gangs of Muslims, Pakistani origin, sex attackers and abusers and rapists? This is not being admitted and owned up to by anybody in the Labour Party. Nobody in the Muslim community except some token stooges who make this at the behest of the Daily Mail or the Sun, but not as a committed member of the community concerned about the credibility of the community. And none of the so-called ethnic media has the decency or the morality or the integrity or the honesty or the belief or the faith to admit that and say that violating any girl, no matter what color or what background, is a sin. It's a major sin. And this is something that has gone on for years and years and years. And my belief from observation is that it has not stopped. It is still going on, but on a different level, in a different way. The techniques must have changed. And there is no admission of this betrayal of these children, the white children, by the community, which has been seen as shielding the Pakistani criminals. Now, the number of the criminals is, compared to the whole population in the area concerned, is obviously very small. But the impact of the disgrace, the impact of the badnaam that these criminals have brought on the whole community, not just the Pakistani background Asians, but others, including some Sikhs whose beard has been a problem because they have been mistaken for being Muslims and they have been abused on those grounds wrongly for being abusers of the white girls because they have been mistaken for being Pakistanis or Muslims. And many of the offenders, looking at the pictures, have got beard. Now this is something very significant. Beard is supposed to be a part of the appearance of the Prophet. Not necessarily that everyone who has a beard is consciously sporting one or keeping one or carrying one, but essentially in the social setting of the community among Muslims, a beard is a symbol of dignity, moderation, respect, and integrity. But these rapists and sex offenders, many of them have beard. I mean, what message are they giving to everyone? So, as I said before, the Muslim community in this country, Muslim community, I also belong to the humanity, but I also belong to the Muslim community. And I've got a duty to say this, and I've got a duty as a campaigner, as a human rights advocate, to point this out. And I'm doing this in the context of the role local councils play in destroying society, destroying people's lives, in destroying the communities and destroying liberty and the ideas of democracy, because these gangs have done more damage to the reputation of Muslims in this country in the last 10 years or whatever, or since their crimes became known in the mainstream media, than any of the so-called terrorists have done. Because the terrorists, as bad or even worse than the sex violators, depending on the standpoint from which they are looked at, the terrorists are seen as somehow ideologically linked. But the sex gangsters are not seen as ideologically linked. They're seen as deranged, degenerate, and they're seen as the real representatives of true Muslims. That is how the opponents, the racistly motivated opponents of Muslim community, look at the sex gangsters. And the lesson must have been quite clearly before the Muslim leaders, so-called, the charity fund fundraisers, the charity leaders, the imams of the mosques, and the other people in the various mosques. But they have not, to my knowledge, made a significant admission of this problem. And whenever this is raised, in fact, there has been attempt by apologists looking for comparative numbers of white sex offenders. Now, that is not acceptable. Even if the white gangsters or sex offenders numerically were bigger in number than the total number of Asian Pakistani sex offenders, that does not excuse a single one of the Asian or Pakistani sex offenders. That is the responsibility of society, and that is the responsibility of those people. That's not a license for the Pakistanis to commit crimes against the white children, or mainly white children, white girls. There must be, by definition, by statistical extrapolation, the significant numbers of Asian girls targeted by Asian, Pakistani, or Bangladeshi sex offenders. So the point is that there is no admission of the presence of these kind of crimes and criminal culture and the sex abuse and the sexual exploitation of children in the Asian families. Now, the role of the local council in each area includes safeguarding children. It doesn't matter what race or ethnicity, children rightly deserve to be given the highest level of protection and safety in the family and in the community. And yet, this has been completely treated contemptuously, recklessly. And children have been betrayed both in London and in the northern shires and the counties and areas where the gang rape and gang sexual abuse targeting of white children became the focus. So the Muslim community is misrepresented by British racist state agenda of stoogery. They've got various organizations that the state agencies secretly brief the media to give platform to this or that organization linked to the mosques or linked to some other Muslim named outfit. And they go on the media and they make stupid, mentally slavish and ignorant and intellectually deficient and immoral, pathetic, absolutely meaningless utterances that do not have any impact on the state. They do not have any impact on the police. They do not have any impact on the local council. They do not have any impact on the local Labour Party or the political parties. So what I'm saying is that people think that if there is a council, it is doing its job. It is not doing its job. And the victims of the sex gang attackers know, and the victims in other parts, including in Tower Hamlets, including in Newham, of other sexual abuse that are going on but not getting attention, they know that the councils are letting them down. And the councils are not the only state agencies or the local government. It is called local government. So it is self-evident that the councils exist with public funding to govern, to deliver governance locally to the satisfaction and the meeting of the needs of the people. So when this application for housing benefit was being mistreated, denied receipt of, and misinterpreted, and the housing benefit or the local housing allowance was not delivered for weeks, an application for defamation was filed in the High Court. That was filed in the High Court in August 2016. And when this application was filed, within 24 hours, a long letter, the first time since the application for housing benefit was made, came from Newham Council. Presumably the lead member of the team or the sub-team member of that team that was lying. And it made a number of meaningless platitudes, did not tell the truth. And the fact that it lied and it contained platitudes and denials and idiocies have been dealt with in extensive correspondence and communications. In the later editions, I shall be reading some of the representative communications. The point is back to discussing the failure of local Labour Party controlled councils to serve the local community, regardless of who the voters are or who voted for who. In Newham, as I said, this is the only local council of any significance that is a one-party council. And as I said to Robin Wales on the 14th of March 2018, he maintained an iron fist policy, gagging the councillors from speaking against his wrongdoing. Robin Wales lied, and I'm saying this, Robin Wales lied when he accused me of condemning the people of Newham. I was condemning him for betraying and showing disrespect to and for failing to serve the people of Newham. So while I was doing the right thing, speaking up for the people of Newham, Robin Wales, who was denying the rights of the people of Newham, was accusing me of doing what he was doing and denying my correct, ethical, moral, consistent, long-standing role and stand. So Robin Wales has never been criticized by any single councillor. There is no record of Robin Wales being diagnosed in the way that he deserved to be based on the behavior by any councillors. They made minor points, but they never actually criticized him. And the fact that he was not criticized is evident in the fact that Stephen Timms, who is now a councillor, Stephen Timms never criticized Robin Wales. In fact, when he was being challenged for the overdue departure from the automatic nomination as the Labour Party's candidate for the election to the post of mayor on the 3rd of May 2018, Stephen Timms remained a supporter, a fan, an ally, a colluder of Robin Wales up to the very last minute. So that shows that Robin Wales was given complete freedom to do as he liked, not just by the councillors, but also by the MP, who was not really obliged to toe his line and to support him or collude with him or overlook his failures and his wrongdoings. Now, this is a council, as I have said, is fronted now by the second incumbent, who is a liar. And I'm saying that Rukhsana Fiaz has lied in support of those liars who said that they did not receive the application form properly signed, or that I had actually not continued the communication with them in inquiring about the contents. So therefore, I have told Rukhsana Fiaz all the details of what happened in that part of the saga of the housing benefit application being messed up by lying employees. So when the defamation petition was filed in the High Court, the employee wrote a long letter and she was given chapter and verse, and she was told off for lying and denying. That was followed 5 days later by a meeting between the applicant and these liars. But the meeting was set up, again misleadingly. They didn't say that the meeting would be held between the applicant and a number of the wrongdoing, decision-making, defaming liars. They said there would be one-to-one meeting between the person who had actually sent the unsigned letter accusing the applicant of not signing their application, which was a lie. So when the applicant arrived for the meeting on the 2nd of September 2016, they assumed that they would be meeting one person only. And there was only one person in front of them talking to them about the application. And there was no indication that there was somebody else listening in from a few yards apart, sitting only a few yards from where this meeting was taking place. So that was deception. That was continuing deception and lying and trapping. So the meeting went on, and there was no issue raised during the meeting that the application had not been done properly, or there had been any withholding of vital information, or there had been any omission of legally, constitutionally required information for a form. So this application was gone through, and there was nothing found that had not been completed or entered or inserted in the application by the applicant. And the applicant gave other details about their background and their experience. And the meeting never had any kind of departure from ordinary standard of civility and normalcy or cordiality. That showed that there was no issue. So when the applicant at the end of the meeting said what was the outcome of the meeting, by then the one person had turned into two persons because somebody else had joined the meeting. And it was the line manager of the person who had started the meeting and had sent the lying letter saying that the application had not contained the signature of the applicant. So these two said that they would confirm later their decision. But they had already made the decision. They could have said that. Because if they had said what they said within the next hour after the ending of the meeting, then they would have been told off, and their latest new lie would have been completely exposed as a criminal offense. The applicant traveled by bus to their flat, and as soon as they got there, at that time there was a landline number available to the council persons, and that landline rang, and the applicant was told that he would not get the full local housing allowance. And the reason was that the applicant shared the kitchen with other people in the flat. That is not true. That was not true, because the applicant lived in a what is called ensuite room, and the applicant never cooks any food, buys the food, and there are restaurants, witnesses across East London where the food is bought from the cooked food. Other food that doesn't need any cooking, like fruits and other stuff, they don't have to be bought from restaurants. But other restaurants, food come when there is a need for cooked food. So they said that the applicant shared the kitchen. That was not mentioned during the meeting. And we shall come to the evidence of lying, the criminality. The box where it said the kitchen is shared is filled in the hand of the person that started the meeting. It wasn't written by the applicant. So they filled that in afterwards. They didn't tell the applicant. So the handwriting is quite clearly that of the particular employee who inserted that, saying that the kitchen was shared. So that has been the key lie, and the kitchen was not shared by the applicant, has not been shared by the applicant, not only because the applicant doesn't belong in the same mode of flat, because the applicant hired or rented the ensuite independent flat themselves, but also the other people who lived in the flat were not capable of being partners in sharing a kitchen with. And the third thing is that the kitchen space was too small. And the fourth thing is that the other people were women, and the applicant would not be sharing anything with women, no matter who they were, because these women were not the applicant's mother or their spouse. And without that, they could not be co-using any facility with those persons that are not members of the family. But the essential fact is that the applicant never used the kitchen. The shared, let alone shared, they never used the kitchen. So this fact has been known to Roxana Fayaz since she became the incumbent in the post of mayor. And Roxana Fayaz has refused to answer the questions, refused to investigate, and refused to explain why she's tolerating the lies told by these employees. And the impact, the immediate impact of the lies included the loss of the money that was supposed to be available to the tenant for living expenditure. So, in order to pay the agreed amount of rent, the tenant was forced to borrow money every week to pay the rent or go without food or essentials. Now that went on, and it is still the case as we speak because the issue is still unresolved. And there are other excuses. The lying regime fronted by Roxana Fiaz has been perpetrating and cooking and perpetuating. Now, this is the failure, the criminality of a local council controlled by the Labour Party. So this should be the definitive, evidential, factual example of how the councils are not fit for purpose, not delivering.